though some fans may have a hard time believing the following, life does go on after an Oklahoma football loss. And if you're a Sooner fan, it better, because you still have an opportunity for a double-digit winning season and a major bowl. Of course, a lot of football still left to be played, 5 games to go, and for the Sooners, can't feel sorry for yourselves. You got to get over Notre Dame. They were the better team. You commend them for the victory, but now got to take care of business, and that begins in Ames, Iowa, Saturday morning for an 11 a.m. kickoff on ABC. The Sooners at Iowa State. First time the Sooners have played there in 5 seasons. Before we break down the game, again, the Sooners still have plenty to play for. What do you mean? You got plenty to play for. I mean, can't win the Big 12, it doesn't look like, because Kansas State keeps winning. Can't go to the national championship. What do you mean still have plenty to play for? Well, this is what I mean. As some of you may or may not know, a total of 10 teams make up the BCS, because you have 5 BCS bowls: National Championship, Fiesta, Sugar, Orange, and Rose. 6 of those teams get there through automatic qualifying by winning their conference. And then the other 4 are at-large bids. We already know that 1 at-large bid is going to go to Notre Dame, well-deserved. Another at-large, in my opinion, is going to be the Clemson Tigers if they continue to do what they're doing. They'll probably finish at 11-1 and would get an at-large, even though it doesn't look like they're going to play for the ACC championship. Looks like Florida State will. Remember, Florida State and Clemson are both from the Atlantic Division in the ACC. Another at-large, in my opinion, is going to come from the SEC, either Georgia or Florida, maybe a shot for LSU as well. That's where another at-large is going to occur. And then that 4th at-large, who knows? The Big Ten, I don't think, is going to get an at-large. They're having a bad year. The Big East, please. The only bid they're going to get is the automatic bid, which right now it looks like Louisville is in line for that. The Pac-12, not looking likely. You know, USC has already lost twice, as has Stanford. Oregon State, they're still that shot, but they still have to play Oregon, and I think Oregon State probably will finish at 10-2. And if you compare Oregon State to Oklahoma, if both finish at 10-2, Oklahoma is going to get the benefit of the doubt, and that leaves the Big 12. In addition to Kansas State, which right now looks like they're in line to win the Big 12 championship. If the season ended today, they would. That leaves another at-large bid, and I think Oklahoma would be in prime shape to get it, assuming that they can win their final 5 games. A 10-2 record, the name Oklahoma itself commands a lot of respect. And remember, no team in the history of the BCS has gotten more love in recent years from the BCS than the Oklahoma Sooners. Case in point, 2003, 2008, 2010. Might look that up sometime as far as BCS and Oklahoma in those particular years. Oklahoma's gotten the benefit of the doubt. And in addition to everything that I've just mentioned, too, in that regard, the only 2 losses Oklahoma has suffered as of now are to the number 2 and 3 teams in the BCS. That's Kansas State and Notre Dame, respectively. So if the Sooners can continue to have the BCS play in their favor, that would have meant that they would have won, first of all, their final 5 games, as well as, let's face it, get the benefit of the doubts over other teams. Remember, there's no non-BCS school, unlike previous years. We've had TCU and Boise State get BCS at-large bids that factor into the equation this year. Boise State, this season, they are ranked in the top 25, but they already have a loss on their schedule, and that was to a pretty mediocre Michigan State squad. So the Sooners, it's there for the taking, but they can't have any more slip-ups, can't have any more mistakes. Take care of Baylor after the Iowa State game, and then West Virginia, Bedlam, Thanksgiving weekend, and then close out in Fort Worth against TCU. And for the Sooners, 10-2 is right there for you. And I think at that point, regardless of what happens with Kansas State, Oklahoma will get a BCS at large. It'd be a pretty big surprise if they didn't, considering everything that we've just broken down. One more thing, too, before we talk about the Iowa State Cyclones, as far as injuries go for the Sooners, as far as current players, you might have seen the Notre Dame game last week where a couple of Sooners were dinged up a bit. The left tackle, Lane Johnson, as well as running back Damian Williams, both injured during the game, but both continued to play. Bob Stoops did not practice either player on Monday. Don't know what their situation is as we're broadcasting the show on Thursday, November 1st. I would imagine if they're going to play this week, it would be pretty hard for me to believe that they would not play in a game that Oklahoma absolutely must have in order to get momentum back that they had racked up through October up until the last game against the Fighting Irish. So I would expect those guys to play, although maybe Damien Williams' playing time might be reduced just a little bit, and later in the show I'll explain why. The Sooners haven't played in Ames, Iowa in 5 years, and that's large in part because of the reformation of the Big 12. They redid the schedules last year, so last season the Sooners got to host Iowa State back-to-back years. That meant that this year it's the home-and-home payback for the Sooners to play there in Ames. And 5 years ago, as some of you already know, if you don't remember the 2007 game, that Iowa State team stunk, and yet it was still a ball game entering the fourth quarter. Sooners played one of the worst games they've ever played. And just like this Saturday's game, that game was an 11 a.m. kickoff as well. And I think it took the Sooners about 3 quarters to wake up in Ames that particular day and pull away from Iowa State and eventually win 17-7. But it was a struggle all afternoon long for Iowa State, against Iowa State, and for part of that morning, in fact. Sooners know that if they play like junk like they did 5 years ago, it will be tough this Saturday. As a matter of fact, they could end up losing. The Cyclones, by the way, 5-2 this year, and I'm sure Iowa State is crossing their fingers, hoping to keep Paul Rhodes, their head coach, for as long as possible, because you know there are programs out there, if they haven't already, they are going to be calling for him to coach their team. No offense at all to Iowa State, but the Cyclones are not considered a college football juggernaut by any means. They're not one of the bigger names in college football, but some of the bigger names eventually could be calling for Paul Rhodes to coach their squad. He is taking an Iowa State program that when it came to bowl games, you never put bowl game and Iowa State in the same sentence. But 2 of the last 3 years they've gone bowling, and they need just one more win to get a bowl bid this year. And considering that you still have Kansas on the schedule, and you haven't played them yet this year, that could be win number 6 for ISU. The Cyclones will make life tough for Oklahoma on Saturday, in my opinion, primarily because of the fact that they have a good run defense. And that's something that OU struggled last week to do against the Fighting Irish, was run the football. That's one of Iowa State's strengths. Something to keep in mind, though, for Iowa State. I still think they'll be good against the run, but they won't be as good because they'll be without the heart and soul of that defense, and that is Jake Knott. First-team All-Big 12 linebacker from a year ago. Had a shoulder injury 2 weeks ago against Oklahoma State, but despite the injury, did play last week in the win over Baylor. But the injury is just too much. He won't play the rest of the regular season. If Iowa State can get to a bowl game, which is a likelihood, then you should see Knott come back. So now A.J. Klein, who's a terrific linebacker in his own right, basically they were known as the best linebacker duo this season in the Big 12, both Klein and Knott. Now Klein has to basically be the Batman of this defense, if you will. Last week had a really good game. Klein, 13 tackles, 7 of them were solo tackles. So Iowa State's defense, along with home field advantage, this will not be a name-your-score type game for Oklahoma. Plus, you have to wonder what Oklahoma's state of mind is going to be after that loss, a bit of a hangover. So if the Sooners have prepared well this week, if they completely focused on Iowa State and have gotten that nasty taste of Notre Dame out of their mouth, then I think the Sooners will be fine. If not, it's going to come down to the fourth quarter, and we know what Oklahoma's been like in the fourth quarter in close games this year. They have not fared very well. They've stunk up the joint in the fourth quarter when it really mattered the most against both K-State and against the Fighting Irish. In terms of Iowa State's offense, well, last week Paul Rhodes did not say anything about who his starting quarterback was going to be. Jerry Barnett against Oklahoma State 2 weeks ago struggled big time, so he lost his job this past week as Rhodes decided to go with Steele Jantz, who was his starter up until late September, and Jantz had a terrific game, but the best game I think he's ever played in Ames, throwing for 5 touchdown passes, 3 of them to Jarvis West, as Iowa State won 35-21 over Baylor. Are those numbers a bit skewed? Well, that might be a fair question to ask because despite the terrific offensive performance by Iowa State, Baylor's defense is probably the worst defense in the Big 12. This week, of course, facing a much tougher test in the Sooners and against a much better secondary. But at the same time, I think what the Oklahoma defense has to do in order to keep Iowa State honest is put lots of pressure from the outside on Jantz. Don't let him get comfortable in the pocket. If you do, then that makes the linebackers for OU have even more responsibility, and that could mean a troublesome day for the Sooner back seven. So get pressure up front. That's all you got to do, and I think that's going to be enough for the Sooner defense in order to make sure that Iowa State doesn't pull off another 35-point performance or better, which is what they had a week ago against the Bears. Final thoughts on this particular ball game. Look, you can't do anything about Notre Dame, Oklahoma. You got to focus on Iowa State. I think defensively, Iowa State will have enough of a rush defense to make life a little difficult for Oklahoma. But I would expect Landry Jones in the passing attack to save the day for the Sooners, and I think Iowa State offensively is going to have a really hard time moving the ball against OU. I don't think there's going to be a lot of points in this particular ball game. I look for the Sooners to win, but I don't look for it to be an absolute blowout. I think the Sooners take care of the Cyclones. I'm going to go 24-10. I'm going to go 24-10. Again, Iowa State's defense, they're not terrible. And playing at home, 11 a.m. kickoff, it may take a while for OU to get going, but I think eventually they will get the job done. And then the next two games for the Sooners, you're going against two bad defenses in Baylor and West Virginia. But Iowa State's defense is far better than those two Ds. That's pretty obvious. Sooners, it may not be a rout, but it will be a Sooner win on Saturday, 24-10. I've got OU winning. Just a reminder, my pick show, my college football prediction show, will be on Friday, November 2nd, in which I'll pick a series of national college games for this week. I'll go head-to-head against the almighty Penny. My post-game show of OU Iowa State will be probably about an hour after the game's over, so it should be around 3 or 4 o'clock on Saturday. So make sure to check that out too. Boomer Sooner.